So we did promise to do some Kashrut tonight as well, as we all enjoy our sushi of unknown origin. So we started a discussion last week on the topic of believability, reliability in Kashrut. In fact, we had a discussion already for, this is 2 weeks running, so this is our third week. And we spoke about this declaration by the Gemara that Eid Echad Ne'eman B'Yisurim. And we said, basically, what does this mean? It means that one individual is enough to tell you that a certain otherwise forbidden item is actually permitted. And this goes for food. So a shochet is believed to say this animal is kosher. The kohen is believed to say this qurban was properly slaughtered. As a matter of fact, the discussion I just had today with someone that a woman, hopefully a married woman, is believed regarding her status. We don't need witnesses for certain things because otherwise life becomes impossible. Effectively, the discussion began and ended with this axiom that we have to trust individuals, even one person, not necessarily two witnesses, when it comes to certain things like kashrut, because otherwise the world ceases to function. We're not going to put two witnesses on top of the kohen in Beit HaMikdash. We don't need two witnesses in order for a man to trust his wife. We don't need two witnesses in order to verify or ascertain that every food product that's transported from one place to another is kosher. If that were the case, kosher food would cost a lot of money and be really bad. To sacrifice the quality in order to round the corners when it comes to the production. Okay. So the question becomes, what exactly can we rely upon when it comes to an individual? So if I know someone is technically Jewish, and he or she tells me, sure, this restaurant is kosher, or that food item is kosher, or this person is trustworthy and reliable, does that individual in question need to be orthodox by all standards? So it's tempting to say, yes, sure, why not? Why should I trust anyone who is not orthodox? Why should I take the word of someone who's looking at me like I'm reformed?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Because why would I trust someone who doesn't know the Halakhah of Kashrut?
I'm going to give you Halakhah. We can discuss, even argue if you want, about what's done today in the industry. Some of what's done is necessary, some of it is nice to be careful about, and some of it's maybe going a little bit further than that. Look, at the end of the day, there is no such thing, good a time as any to segue into this discussion, there is no such thing anywhere, ever, as a humrah, as a stricture, that doesn't have negative consequences. Period. End of story. You may not know what the consequences are, I'll tell you. You want to be strict when it comes to kashrut. The best case scenario, it costs you money. Worst case scenario, Otniel was going to say, it costs you kashrut. What do you mean? True story. In 2006, there was a very famous purveyor of chicken in a certain Haredi community. We'll call it Muncie. And in Muncie, there was a certain supermarket. It was very clever. It's not a supermarket. It's a very large real estate space where the guy doesn't even own any of the counters or stands or corners in the supermarket. He actually rents it out to other purveyors. So there are a few butchers from different hashgachot or whatever who specialize in different things in the same place. There are a few different vegetable suppliers. And he just owns the supermarket, and he, in general, procures hashgacha over everything in there and allows other places their flexibility. So this guy, the name of the company that no longer exists was Halakhah, success. Great name for a company. How could you fail? So I have an expression like this in Arabic. I don't know if you ever heard this. It's like a person who has bad. You already understood this, someone who has bad luck. Even if you call him lucky, it's not going to help. Like when your mazal is bad, you go change your name. Call yourself the best. Call yourself Fortuna. It's not going to help. So the guy opens this store, and he is under the hashgacha of Kiryas Yoel, which in Hebrew is Kiryat Yoel. It means this is the Satmar enclave in upstate, a little bit past Monroe, is the name of the location of this particular Satmar community, and this is an extremely expensive hashgacha. They claim to be the best of the best, the most exclusive, the most prestigious. They don't give their hashgacha to everyone, and they have their humrot, their strictures that have no end to them. Which is great, because how can you be too strict when it comes to kashrut? How could you possibly, like everyone who wants to be stricter than the next one wins? How do you lose in this proposition? So the guy was selling chickens that were twice as expensive as the chickens the guy next door was selling. And so Muncie being Muncie, if in fact it happened in Muncie, you'll Google it, the guy was making a fortune. Tons and tons of money. So people in the Haredi community, they see chickens that cost more, so naturally it's more kosher, what do you mean? And so everyone goes to him. In fact, I would be convinced, knowing what I know from the meatpacking industry, that he probably owned the guy who was selling the cheaper chickens next to him, and this is like a feeder business. Oh no, you just want basic kosher? Yeah, we sell that too. Well, why would you buy it when you can buy chickens that are twice as expensive as what the other guy is selling? So everyone in Muncie is convinced. Everyone's convinced beyond reasonable doubt, this guy's chickens are the super ultra kosher, this is like the kryptonite of chickens. And what ended up happening was that the story broke thusly. The owner of the whole big supermarket, and these things are massive, it's like the size of a city. The owner of the whole supermarket itself, the space, the real estate, was it was a wedding of his, I think it was his granddaughter, was getting married. And so he invited the main kashrut supervisor at Kiryas Yoel, aka Kiryat Yoel. And he says to the guy, the mashgiach replies to him, I'm very careful about where I go, I'm very careful about what I eat. Who's providing the meat? So the guy said, who's providing the meat? We'll be serving chickens that you yourself are the mashgiach of. He says, really, where are you getting them? So he says, what do you mean? I'm getting them from Halakhah, the guy who's, owns this chicken corner in my supermarket. They're like, Halakhah, he hasn't bought from me since last Pesach. He says, what do you mean? He's got the stamps, he's got the labels, the boxes, the invoices. I see him every day. He's the most successful chicken guy in the entire supermarket. So he says, we have to look into this. So what does he do? They do a stakeout. They wait at 2:30 in the morning when they suspect that this guy's delivery is going to show up, and he's getting Purdue non-kosher chickens. And he was falsifying receipts, and he was falsifying the packaging, and he was making a fortune. Why was he making a fortune? Well, if you're buying kosher chicken and you're selling at a reasonable markup, so you're making whatever it is you're making. When the markup is so high, when the product sells for so much money, the spread, as we say in English, or the margin you can make by buying really cheap and selling really expensive is huge. You've created a massive temptation to pad your margins, your profitability, that much more, right? It sounds counterintuitive. How many celebrities do you know, some of them famous anti-Semites, who make a lot of money and nonetheless get caught cheating on their taxes, right? The famous Dieudonné, he was going to be the king of the world until they found out something about him and taxes, right? How is it possible? I don't understand. My classic example when I was in high school was Tommy Hilfiger. He made like $42 million one year and he got caught evading taxes on 14. Really, Tommy? Really? You netted $28 million and it still wasn't enough? What were you going to buy with the extra $14 million? I wanted, it was like the house that you already had put a down payment on just wasn't big enough? You wanted 5 swimming pools instead of 4? So someone who makes an honest and decent living and pays their taxes is not often tempted by these things because, okay, I'll cheat, I'll save $5,000, $10,000. So the IRS says everybody steals a pencil. But people who make lots of money, their appetite gets out of control. Right? L'appétit vient en mangeant. Sometimes you eat so much money and the more of it you consume, the more of it you want. So why did this happen? This happened because the guy started making crazy amounts of money. And then he got addicted to money. And then he said, wow, where there's money, there's more money. And if only I can make myself more profitable. So you try to cut costs within kosher, reasonable limits, and then you say, you know what? Kosher chicken costs less than $1 a pound, and I'm buying this stuff at 3 or 4. I can make a killing. Just want you to know, by the way, the guy was a tremendous Baal Chesed. He was one of the most generous men in Muncie. It wasn't even like he was eating all the money. He was giving money to yeshivot. In fact, he was donating some of his proceeds and even giving chicken, non-kosher ones. That was nice. It was like maybe it's chesed, I don't know. He was giving non-kosher chickens to yeshivot, to entire kollels and yeshivot in Muncie. Generous, nice, sweet guy, which is crazy. It's like he wants to be charitable, and he still can't overcome his obsession, like his addiction to money. Huh?
What happened with this guy? He has no chance of coming to Teshuvah.
That's an even better question than how it happened. What happened afterwards? I'll tell you what happened afterwards. Everybody in Monsey was up in arms. Couples that already made Aliyah were going, like, doing Hagarat Kelim. They were they all realized they're eating non-kosher chickens. And these are like the most religious of the religious people in the entire city. And they're all furious. Where is this guy? We have to kill him. So the rabbi, naturally, something goes wrong, we have to kill him. Allahu Akbar. So they apprehend the guy. A bunch of rabbanim from Monsey, they sit down, we want to hear everything, want to know everything. And the guy's like, you want to know everything? Like, you want to know who else is doing this? The discussion stopped. So he did give his wife a get. At least he was, respectful of that. He kind of apologized to people who he upset. He also blew shofar on Rosh Hashanah, by the way. He's like a very publicly well-known, trustworthy guy. So who is more religious than him? And can you trust him in Kashrut? But I'm telling you, sometimes the humrot get so out of control that you end up being lenient. And so the best case scenario is just spend twice as much money as you have to. Why? Because you want to fit in, you want to impress people, or whatever. Okay, but at the same time, the fact that it's more expensive makes it less attainable for people. I don't think competition in Kashrut is a healthy thing for a community anyway, but that's a whole other discussion. We can talk about how to conduct yourself. If you want to be strict in something, there's a way to do it. If you're going to be strict about something, you're going to say, Shufuni Anas, everybody look at me, post on Facebook, where's Sufyan?
I it.
Yeah, put it on Facebook. I just bought this set of dishes, or I just took my kelim to the mikveh, and I love Pesach, I love cleaning and being kosher. It's normally people who are crying for attention.
I think that there's a difference between that and telling your friends, when someone's going through some sort of change, or they're trying to work on themselves, they want that support.
So close friends is one thing. People, sometimes you talk to a parent or a counselor, a teacher, or rabbi, or you're looking for advice on something, that's fantastic.
Yes.
To broadcast it publicly brings this kind of negative attention. So this guy who walks around telling everyone, my chicken's the most kosher chickens in the world, there's something wrong with that. I'm not even, before you even get to the chicken, maybe it's true. There's a problem with that. There's a problem with saying, I'm the best, I'm the most exclusive, I'm the most elite. Incidentally, and I have mentioned this in the past, there's a Hashgacha in Israel, right? They're proud of it, and they broadcast the Badatza De'edah Haredit, that mamash, this is part of their constitution. They say, we don't rely on any other Hashgacha, period, ever, at all.
Never,
ever,
ever does that as well.
The OU, not necessarily. They do accept certain products from other Hashgachot, there's some they don't, but some of it's politics and some of it's actually legitimate. When it comes to the Badatza De'edah Haredit, here's an organization that tells you our entire living, our whole parnasah, the whole concept, what gives us our business, what brings people to us, is that we don't trust anybody. How bizarre does that sound when we spoke just last week about how did Chazal come to the conclusion that Ed Echad Ne'eman B'Isurim, one witness is enough when it comes to Isurim? Why was this? Abigail, you look like you were paying attention?
I was not.
You were
1 minute, I was not.
destroyed. So what did we say last week? We said a couple of reasons. First of all, if you can't trust one witness when it comes to kashrut, what does that make very difficult for us to do?
We're going to eat at each other's house.
Right. And so our question was, so what's the big deal? I have to eat by my neighbor's house? It's so important, but what happened to kashrut? I'm really careful about the kosher food. Why should I rely on my neighbor? Why should I care? Understand the logic. Hazal actually said, how do we know that you can rely on one person when it comes to what's kosher and what's not? Easy. Because otherwise we can't eat in each other's homes. How can it be that we don't eat in each other's homes? How can we come to a point, how can we come to a reality where people can't trust each other? What's worse than this? That's hell. That's Gehinnom already now on earth.
Well, a lot of people do that on Pesach. They would not eat at anyone's place on Pesach.
Maybe temporarily, that's one of the explanations for the Mimuna. Maybe temporarily because people were so strict about certain things, etc. So fine. And then how did they break this cycle? It's interesting because the Mimuna itself is actually the response to this. If everybody, this is the Rabbi David Ovadia, I believe, was the one he wrote a book on the minhagim of my grandparents' city of Sfro in Morocco. And so he writes, the reason everybody celebrated the Mimuna was because during Pesach, it was uncommon for people to invite each other to each other's homes. There'd be friends and family that were close, but not so much neighbors, etc. Because whatever, everybody's careful, they have their own world. So, as Pesach, Motzei Pesach, as the Chag is over, because people were chomping at the bit, we say in English, they were grinding their teeth. I don't like this reality of not being able to trust other people eating at each other's houses. They specifically invented a holiday where everybody eats at everybody else's house. Because we have to relieve this sense of stricture, of constraint. I don't like living with this feeling that I can't trust anyone. It's spiritual paranoia. It's a spiritual conspiracy theory, and it's very disturbing to the neshama, let alone to one's psychology. So, if Chazal use this as a proof that you should be able to trust people, how is it that we reward the institutions that don't trust anyone? That we reward the institutions for being exclusive, you can't rely on this, you can't rely on that. Forget the Lashon Hara, forget the politics. I'm talking about the Kashrut. Don't take away from people the Chazakah of Kashrut. And because Mira is making faces, Chazal even said like this. There's a distinction between the people you can trust and the people that you can't in Kashrut. Do you want to tell me, Mira, that if someone has to be perfect in every possible mitzvah and careful about every single avirah for me to trust them when it comes to Kashrut? If that's the case, I don't eat my own shechita anymore. Okay, people sometimes make mistakes. If you have to be perfect, that means none of us can be trusted, right? And we're back in Gehinnom. No, life isn't like that. The Gemara says, look, there are a couple of important distinctions to make when it comes to Kashrut. Number one, the most important distinction is that someone who's careful about a particular mitzvah is generally considered trustworthy. Meaning, that aunt who's maybe not extremely careful about Shabbat, but is careful about Kashrut, maybe not everything she serves or tells you is necessarily not kosher. How far you want to go and what you want to do, etc. These are technical details. The Gemara's explanation is like this. There is a difference, there is a distinction. The first chapter of Masechet Chulin, by the way, talking about shechita. There is a difference between someone who is what's called mumar le'te'avon, someone who is called mumar le'achis. Mumar le'hamir in Hebrew. Lo indurenu ben tov v'ra min ra b'tov. We saw this in Parashat Behar. How long ago? Maybe again, 4 or 5 weeks. Le'hamir means to exchange. So a mumar is someone who exchanged his or her religion, an apostate. So even when it comes to apostates, right, that's a pretty difficult status to achieve. We make the distinction between someone whose apostasy is based on appetite and someone whose apostasy is ideological. So let's say, for example, this aunt who's not so careful about Shabbat. She's not careful about Shabbat because she hates God, because she's angry, because she believes in another religion, because she prays to the stars, because she's a politician. If she disbelieves in God as a concept, or the Torah as a concept, then yes. Be still my broken heart. What can I do? Someone who doesn't believe in the Torah and the mitzvot, it's going to be really hard to trust them on anything. This is why people like this generally aren't accepted as witnesses. Well, you're testifying at a wedding, which is a religious ceremony. If you don't believe God created the world or that He wants men to marry women, what is it that we're doing here and what are you testifying about? So generally, if your non-observance of a mitzvah is ideological, we're going to say this kind of individual is not trustworthy. So maybe I put on tefillin, maybe I keep Shabbat, and maybe I believe that kosher food is a gimmick or a conspiracy or some, whatever it is. So if it's ideological, be careful. Someone who's not necessarily an idealist, or for that matter, someone who maybe didn't benefit from growing up in an observant home. It could be someone who grew up and went to public school, that's where their parents sent them. Or didn't benefit from a formal Jewish education. That's true of many of our brothers and sisters from Europe and America, happens just as well. So does that mean this person is ideologically opposed to certain things? Okay, so if this person is careful about kashrut, maybe that's the one mitzvah they're careful about, maybe already we can be a little bit more lenient. How far we can stretch these limits, how much we can actually rely on is a little bit more delicate. But already the Gemara says this, it makes this much clearer. First of all, you don't have to be perfect to be trustworthy. You do need to be somewhat knowledgeable if you're testifying about something in particular. So if a tourist comes by and sees someone kill an animal, say, hey, that was kosher shechita. Okay, so if you know what shechita is, and if you know with the halachot, great. And if not, then no. First Mishnah in Masechet Chulin actually says that a child can do shechita, or someone who's not necessarily initiated, provided that someone is standing over them and watching them. My sons have killed chickens before. 3.
What? Sorry?
My sons have done shechita chickens.
Oh yeah?
Sometimes by kaparot, yeah.
And you're gonna eat them?
Huh?
And you're gonna eat them?
No, I throw them out. I kill chickens for fun there. Yes, they're perfectly kosher. If someone is standing there, knows the halachot of shechita, and lets them... I mean, we did this... why? Sasha killed chickens before too, no? So what do we do with them?
Eat it.
Huh? Someone else ate it. What's the big deal? Oh my God, someone eats from my husband's shechita? That's crazy. Well, if someone who knows what he's doing prepared the knife, I said, somebody do it. Fix the knife, gave him up, I held it for him. And he cut it, so it's kosher. So he's not a trained shochet. Okay, but someone who knows what he's doing is watching over him, it's okay. If someone who doesn't know what he's doing,
If the woman does it, I mean, we cannot do it.
so whoever came on Sunday,
Yeah.
this is the first Mishnah in Masechet Chulin. Like the whole Masechet begins this way. Everyone can do shechita, anyone Jewish can do shechita. Man, a woman, a child, whatever, etc. The Rima, the famous Ashkenazi commentator on the Shulchan Aruch is born in Cordoba, Spain. He was definitely Sephardim. So the Shulchan Aruch, which is typical, he quotes the Mishnah. It's okay, men, women do shechita, etc. The Rima writes, really, we have a suspicion. The Gemara mentions that there it's talking about men. Some men are weak, and they do shechita, see shechita, and they get faint, they pass out.
Some
So
men.
so it's okay. Today maybe we have other men. So the Rama says we have a suspicion. He's like, here in Ashkenaz country, we have a custom that women don't do shechita because we're concerned they might pass out. The Shulchan Aruch has no such concerns. Why? Because he grew up among Sephardi women. You know, kill people. Birds are small. It was a joke.
Yeah, no, people used to buy.
Sometimes, anyway. Eh?
People used to buy a live chicken in the marketplace, and they would just probably kill
Well,
it.
the simple halachic explanation is that
they were shochet.
yeah. So the Shochet typically was a man, but it doesn't mean anyone who's obligated in a mitzvah is capable of fulfilling your obligation for it. So women are not exempt from kashrut, so they have to be careful of what they eat. So if I have to eat from birds and animals that are properly slaughtered, and a woman has the same obligation, she can do shechita for me, I can do shechita for her. It's okay. Same is true of kiddush, by the way.
Goy can do shechita?
No,
If you...
because they don't have the obligation to eat from it, they're incapable of fulfilling your obligation this way. Anyway,
Kiddush and Motzi, no?
in theory, as long as you have the same obligations,
And a man is Yotze?
yes, a woman has to make hamasi before she eats, so she can fulfill the obligation. Or the other way around. Same with kiddush, same with havdalah, same with yeah. Exceptions would be like tefillin or tzitzit or mitzvot that don't pertain to women, so they cannot fulfill your obligation.
If
few others.
a woman says Kiddush, everyone can be Yotze.
She has the same obligation that I do. Is that? It is, and the Gemara says it's an exception. Women are obligated to. Everyone who's obligated in Shamor is obligated in Zachor. So if you're obligated not to violate Shabbat, you also have the obligation to proactively sanctify the Shabbat, which we understand to mean Kiddush. Anyway, the point is like this. The Gemara already makes a very bold statement when it says that even someone who's not perfectly observant is not necessarily untrustworthy when it comes to certain mitzvot, except there are two conditions. Number one is this non-observance has to be of the non-ideological kind. So if someone tells you, sure, I eat kosher food, but I don't believe God created the world, okay, we'll look for another mashgiach. If someone tells you that they keep Shabbat and they put on tefillin, they pray, etc., but they eat non-kosher food, here it becomes a little bit more complicated, right? If you don't believe in the particular mitzvah, or you don't observe the mitzvah that you're testifying about, that becomes a little bit difficult. Then you're saying basically, yes, I'm weak when it comes to this mitzvah. Here the Gemara says you need a mashgiach. So what happens if, and here the example in the Gemara is a shochet. What happens if a shochet admits that he sometimes eats non-kosher meat? The Gemara says he's trusted if someone stands over him. I mean, I don't suspect that he's killing the animal for avodah zarah. He's not slaughtering this chicken to the devil. He's just a little bit lazy, or he has an appetite, and sometimes he eats non-kosher meat. And if this is the case, then if someone is mashgiach, if someone is standing over him, which by the way, the only place in the entire Talmud this concept of hashgacha even appears. It's not in the context of an observant guy who slaughters an animal and tells someone the meat is kosher. Not in the context of someone who owns a restaurant and needs someone watching over him to make sure he's not putting in non-kosher meat. If the owner of the restaurant himself is observant, or herself, or whoever it is, we may not even necessarily halachically require a mashgiach. Revolutionary. I mean, it's not the way we generally hold today, but I will tell you it's true. In the industry, they make exceptions for observant restaurant owners. In other words, there are companies that as a matter of principle, as a matter of policy, if the owner of the restaurant is non-observant, they may have the status of, in their eyes, someone who's not Jewish. So a non-Jew opens a restaurant, and we would say, okay, so have a mashgiach in the restaurant, someone supervising, someone who knows halakhah, who's there most of the time. I mean, sometimes mashgiach goes to the bathroom, he steps out, takes a phone call, whatever. He's not there 1,000% of the time, but Someone who is generally present most of the time. If they're serving meat, maybe they're more careful. They have someone or they have two, it depends on the place. If the owner of the restaurant is observant, many kashrut certifying organizations will actually be more lenient in that they might not require a mashgiach all the time. They might not. They might allow one of the employees to be a mashgiach, which you might think is a conflict of interest, but it's not necessarily, because we have no reason to suspect this person of doing wrong. They'll still check invoices, they'll check orders to make sure how much have you sold, how many of your products were bought from here, from there. Let's make sure the numbers add up. That's something they started doing, by the way, with the chickens after this whole Muncie scandal. Now what they want to do is they you wonder why they didn't do this before. This is with bullets in America. They require the manufacturers to disclose how many bullets they manufactured, and then they try to follow how many of these bullets, the ammunition, was sold to whichever stores. In other words, they know how many bullets are out there, and they can tell if someone's lying or cheating or importing them illegally, etc. If it's going to the black market. So they decided they're going to use what they do with bullets and apply this to chickens. How many kosher chickens were slaughtered at the particular slaughterhouse? How many of them went to which distributors? And this way they have two checks, both what the person tells you he sold, and they can compare it to how much was actually out there. If he sold 10 times more chickens than they slaughtered in the place, it doesn't make sense. So there is a certain degree of leniency, even as the proprietor of an institution. They'll often tell you, okay, so you're observant if you're there. Maybe you don't need mashgiach, maybe you'll need mashgiach when you're not there, etc. And just because someone is not perfectly observant of everything doesn't necessarily mean that you can't rely on their hashgacha. If you know someone to be careful about kashrut, already it's a good start. Even if they're mitzvot, they're not observing. If it's just because they don't know, they're not aware of them, they're not aware of the severity or the importance of them, fine. If it's someone who's ideologically opposed to certain things, it becomes more difficult. Incidentally, someone who grew up observant and stopped observing, it's much more difficult in some ways to accept someone like this as a mashgiach than it is someone who's, let's say, converted or a recent Baal Teshuvah. In the case of someone who didn't grow up observant, I didn't know any better, I'm learning, I'll do more mitzvot as I pick them up. And sometimes in a small community or outside of big metropolitan areas, you just don't have that many people who can work in this capacity. Someone who grew up observant and stopped being observant, you really have to ask yourself questions like, what brought this about? Life is difficult, you're in a bit of a funk, you're kind of depressed, it's one thing. If you're questioning your emunah, if you're questioning the veracity of the Torah, you're a little bit nervous around questions like that.
Do you make a difference between business and a private person? I mean, when you go eat at a restaurant, when you go eat at someone, do you expect the same thing? Like is the person, because sometimes like the person cannot. Let's say you have a good friend that used to be religious, but it's a good friend, the guy says, yeah, I'm gonna do it like a kosher, it's gonna be all the halachot and everything. He just don't care. He just doesn't care about it. I mean,
if this person is otherwise believable to you, in other words, you trust this person would not feed you something asur, it's not asur to rely on. Whether or not you want to is up to you.
But it's not disrespectful to the authority of the rabbanim and the whole thing. Like, there is a system in place, and by eating there, you're basically saying, okay, I really need that system because...
Let me tell you something else. I'll turn the question on its head. I would prefer to eat in a restaurant that's owned by someone that I trust than to eat in a restaurant owned by someone I don't know or don't trust, even with the best hashgacha in the world. Because if you want to cheat, you can always find a way to do it. This guy in Muncie, this was years, man. It wasn't like it's going on for a long time. What happened actually was I think that he was slowly buying less and less, meaning he still had legitimate receipts and was falsifying some of them. And then it became bigger. And they said, well, im kvar az kvar, if I'm already doing this, I may as well do that. And shoot the moon, as they say in bridge. I'll just double or nothing, I'll bet everything.
It's like the little kid who wants to find chocolate out of the box and he eats the whole box.
Of course, there's one chocolate who's going to notice, it's two, it's not such a big deal. And it's like, I already ate this, I may as well eat everything and then hide the box.
No, exactly. No, but I'm just saying, he started with few chickens and then he went big, because
it's the temptation.
It's tempting.
It's the temptation. So why am I saying this? Because I don't think the best mashgiach in the world is not a substitute for someone who has a conscience. And I would eat the shechita or the hashgacha of a restaurateur or a food producer whom I trust over going somewhere else where I don't know the guy or I don't trust him. The stamp is not that impressive to me because at the end of the day, these places have mistakes too.
It's not a concern to you the fact that even if you know that guy, he has some sort of rebellion against the system and decided not to have a...
You say rebellion against the system. Maybe the guy is trying to start a restaurant and doesn't have tons of money. And he can't
Yeah,
afford to
yeah.
pay like $1,000 a month plus whatever the hourly wage. Incidentally, they dictate the hourly wage to you for the mashgiach. I'm telling you, for someone asked me about, if I could help him with this. A particular organization, it's public information, a particular organization charges $1,000 a month for just to use their name, and they dictate that you can't pay the mashgiach less than $40 an hour. Okay? Which is $80,000 a year if you calculate 40 hours a week times 50 weeks,
They
etc.
don't give you a maximum though. They only give you a minimum.
Oh, you can pay him $8,000 an hour if you want. Yes, that's very profitable. You can if you want to. But basically, you didn't even open the restaurant. You haven't paid any of your bills. Okay? And you're already down almost $100,000. So not everyone is capable of paying this. Now you would say, okay, tough luck. Well, you've just created what we call in economics a barrier of entry into the market. Not only do you have to have good food and good suppliers and a good chef and a good location and a good ambiance, in addition, you have to have an extra $100,000 for the hashgacha. Okay, maybe you have it, maybe you don't. The point that I'm making is yes, there's a great value to the reliability, to the trustability of the proprietor, more so, in my humble opinion, than any given hashgacha. Because at the end of the day, hashgachot are only as good as the people they send there. And although we'd like to believe that everyone works as a mashgiach and a talmid chacham and knows all the tricks, some of them are young guys that are still in college. Some of them are people that don't have that much experience, or they're working at this job. The turnover is very high. It's not an extremely prestigious job. It doesn't pay always exceptionally well. Wherever in the industry's got some complications to it.
Yeah, Rivka told me in the campuses what she remembers is that they would just take one of the students as the mashgiach for the kosher dining hall for like a day, and they would rotate and get a few dollars.
So what you see is the staff. You don't see that. Or they'll tell you, the president of this hashgacha is someone with a really long beard. But he's not walking on his hands and knees in the slaughterhouse, checking lungs. It's usually delegated to someone who's delegated to them. Anyway, it is what it is. So it's revolutionary. Yes, Chazal did say you can rely on such situations and such people when it comes to kashrut. To what extent you want to do it is something else, but at least we can establish that you need not be perfect in order to eat it, to invite people over, or for people to trust your kashrut or hashgacha. At the end of the day, it comes to reliability. In fact, Chazal said, how can you tell? What's the definition of mumar l'te'avon? I'm going to let you guys go in a second. So mumar l'te'avon, the Gemara says, is someone who deep down inside, someone who has like this appetite, this temptation to violate the halachot of kashrut, someone who, the expression of the Gemara is like this, La shabik inish haticha de isura, La shabik inish haticha de hetera wa achil isura. Your normal, average, ordinary person would not leave a piece of like a kosher hamburger and intentionally eat a non-kosher one if you presented them with both. So here's a kosher hamburger, here's a non-kosher hamburger. Let's leave the price out of it. If I were to give you both as a gift, you would probably eat the kosher hamburger. So really, the only reason you eat non-kosher is because sometimes you're tempted. Sometimes you're tempted, okay, people are tempted by different things. If this person is an idealist, or an ideologue, and this person says, wait a second, I so disbelieve in kashrut that if you give me kosher meat, I'm not going to eat it, because it's inhumane, or arguments are out there. So someone who disbelieves in kashrut, or bizarrely enough, someone who thinks that kashrut is inhumane, improper, etc., for whatever reason, if they don't eat it, or they ideologically refuse to eat it, they're in that category of someone who just couldn't care less about the mitzvot, ideologically opposes at least this one, and therefore you can't trust them when it comes to other things. But someone, that's the test. If you give them kosher and non-kosher, so sure, I'll eat kosher food, why not? It's nice, it's great, it's a mitzvah. Sometimes I'm lazy, sometimes I'm hungry, but it's not to say that I disbelieve in the principle itself. It's already a good start. So we'll pick it up from here, and that's all next week. Chloe, thanks again so much for sending us your